Hello, everybody. Welcome to our event today. I'm going to give people about a minute or two to hop into our call today. We're excited. We already have our numbers growing. This is good to see. Just want to give some time to let as many people as possible start alongside. And I told our speakers that as I host, I will talk about the weather, and they can obviously chat in as well. I have a lot to say because I'm in California, but this winter has been particularly harsh for us. Of course, the standards. So I'm Mexican, born and raised in Mexico City, so even worse. These climates aren't for me. But then again, one of our speakers, Anando, is in Toronto. And
well, I heard about California or Southern California getting a blizzard warning, and I was like, wait a second, is that right? Like those kind of things are usually applicable to, the Northeast or, Canada, whatever, where I live. But when I heard a blizzard warning in areas in Southern California, I was like, something doesn't sound right there.
Exactly. Something doesn't sound right at all. Of course, then you look at the temperatures and all of that, and it's definitely not as big a deal as Toronto's weather. It's funny because Bay Area also, it never snows or anything. And on Wednesday, I was in Boulder for work, and it was snowing and really.
Well, it's more dangerous when you're not prepared, right? Like we are prepared with all our snow plows and winter tires and all that stuff. But in a place like California or Texas, when you get snow, you don't have the equipment or you're not prepared for snow. So it's a lot more dangerous.
Exactly. The snow in Boulder was definitely way worse than Bay Area, but business as usual. The lift picked us up. Everything was perfect. I think we're just about to start this officially. Let's do it. Welcome, everybody. My name is Alex Velasquez. I'm going to be hosting today's event. Our webinar today is called Achieving Zero Trust Security with HashiCorp and Datadog. And we will be looking at how Datadog and HashiCorp solutions work on the HashiCorp platform together to help enterprises align on clear strategy for not only cloud adoption, but also observability into how applications, network services, and users access, authenticate, and authorize across the ecosystem. I have to confess that I'm particularly excited about this event. I've been working with Datadog since I joined HashiCorp 3 years ago. It's always been a pleasure to work with the team. And also Boundary. Boundary is a relatively new product, and I'm excited to be hosting this because of that. We have two wonderful speakers. We're very lucky. We have Anando Chatterjee. He is product manager for HCP Boundary here at HashiCorp. And Sri Subramanian is a senior product manager for Datadog. We will, you can ask questions anytime. You can use the chat to ask your questions. We'll be answering them either live at the end or during the event through the chat. And we will be starting with Anando on the Boundary side of things. Thank you, Anando. Go for it.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody for joining this webinar today. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, because I know folks are joining us from all over the world. And as Alex introduced me, I'm a product manager within the Boundary team at HashiCorp, based out of Toronto. We just got a whole whack of snow yesterday, so things are a little cold here. Hopefully everybody else is doing great. So usually when I'm in a room, speaking to people about Boundary, I usually go, hey, show of hands, how many of you have seen Boundary or, have kicked the tires or used it even a bit. But, because it's the virtual nature of this webinar, I can't do that. But I'm hoping some or most of you have at least heard of Boundary. And today I'll go through a little bit more details around what Boundary does, what is its value proposition, and how you can use Boundary and Datadog together to not only provide secure access to infrastructure for all your end users, but you can also do a whole lot of auditing and observability to ensure that the right folks have access to the right targets. So as I'm getting started, I'm going to turn my camera off and focus so that we can focus on the slide on the screen here. And hopefully, once we go through the slides, some of you will have questions. I can answer them either through the chat, or we can talk about it verbally. So once again, thank you for joining. I'm going to start by talking about a problem that affects organizations of all sizes, regardless of the industry, which is providing end users with secure access to remote infrastructure resources. On this particular slide, I have a very typical access workflow where a developer is trying to access a production application hosted on a private network, and they need to move through multiple security layers that each require their own configuration and upkeep. So in this workflow here, the first step is usually a VPN to remote into the private network. So not only does that mean that the user now has access to the entire private network, but it is a challenge for admins to onboard and offboard a large number of users and their credentials. Once the user is within the network, it is quite challenging to configure and constantly maintain the firewall with individual IP addresses, especially within the cloud operating model where hosts are constantly being added and torn down in order to scale up or scale down depending on the load. Permissions are also based on IP addresses, which are pretty brittle, rather than on user identity, which stays constant. So that is also another layer of challenge that an admin has to deal with. And lastly, in this workflow, the developer has to manually provide credentials to get access to the application, or in case of a infrastructure access, it's a VM, virtual remote desktop, or so on. So those credentials are most likely static; they're not brokered, which greatly increases the attack surface and risk of unauthorized access. Now, if you move on to the next slide, especially in a cloud operating model, the secure access workflow becomes exponentially unmanageable in a sort of a hybrid cloud environment where resources may be located both in private cloud infrastructure as well as on public cloud providers spread across multiple providers, regions, and data centers. Now, since cloud is synonymous with scalability, which means that you are spinning up and tearing down resources dynamically as required. Unlike traditional monolithic architectures, you're also not dealing with multitude of microservices and ephemeral resources, which are owned and consumed by many different teams across your organization, and sometimes even partner organizations. Now imagine the complexity with managing access to all of these resources and making sure that only the right individuals have access to the resources they need. So this is where, if you move to the next slide, this is where HashiCorp's Boundary steps in. If you can move to the next slide, please. There we go. Thank you. So Boundary is a proxy-based solution which provides a secure way to access critical systems without having to manage credentials or exposing the entire network. Access is provided based on identity, and only the required targets are exposed based on the concept of least privileged access. So I'll go through this sort of high-level diagram very quickly so that makes a little bit more sense about what Boundary brings to the table here. So starting with the item on the 3 o'clock of this diagram. So firstly, Boundary integrates with your IDP of choice, such as Azure AD, Ping, Okta, or really any identity provider which supports OpenID Connect. So this makes onboarding or offboarding your users a centralized activity and not something you'd need to do at multiple places. Then based on role-based authorization, you can define which users or groups have access to which targets. Once these roles have been defined, the process of granting access to resources becomes automatic and seamless. Secondly, Boundary has this concept, we call it dynamic host catalogs. What it means is it automatically discovers targets and makes them available for access to your end users based on their roles that you define in the first step. So admins need not constantly add or remove targets manually. Boundary can do this for you automatically as ET sources are deployed and turned on. So currently, Boundary supports dynamic host discovery with the major public cloud providers, such as Azure and AWS. And we're constantly looking to add support for other providers, such as GCP and others, and also resource types based on usage and customer feedback. And lastly, Boundary can leverage Vault to check out secrets and provide just-in-time access to these targets. Boundary ships with a built-in static credential store to get you started, in case you want to do a POC or just want to see how this whole brokering and credential injection thing really works. But once you figured that out, to take things a little step further, Boundary also integrates very well with Vault, and you can automatically broker credentials, and it can also inject credentials so that those credentials are never actually exposed to the end users accessing a target. And this further strengthens your security posture. Boundary provides a very simple and consistent workflow to your end users to access all targets within the organization. So no matter the location of the target, whether the target resides in a private cloud or in a public cloud, whether the target is static, sort of like a VM, or it's ephemeral, whether the access credentials are simple username password based, or they're certificate or public private key based, or whether the application is SSH, remote desktop, accessing databases, the entire workflow for accessing these targets remains consistent for all your end users. So now if we move to the next slide here, you will recall, my very first slide, I talked about the traditional workflow for access. And imagine if you're using Boundary, that workflow for access is a lot simpler and secure. So your end user's trusted identity is used to provide them access to resources, as Boundary leverages existing auth provider to authenticate and authorize users. And since access is determined via identity and roles and not through static IP addresses, the configuration stays the same. So admins don't need to configure access on an individual basis. Instead, they're able to define roles and provide grants, which could be based on users' group memberships as already defined within the identity provider. Also, unlike a traditional VPN, Boundary provides access to only the required targets, so users don't have access to the entire network. This obviously greatly reduces the attack surface in case a malicious actor were to attempt a breach on your infrastructure. New targets, in this case, are also automatically discovered by Boundary as they're deployed and are made available to users for access based on the policies that were defined by the admin. And last but not least, if you're using Vault as your secrets management system, Boundary could either broker the access credentials for the user or provide a completely passwordless experience by leveraging a feature we call credential injection, by checking all the credentials from Vault and directly injecting them while creating a session to the target. Let's move on to the next slide here. So traditionally, Boundary has been available as an open source project for the last couple of years, but as of last fall, so starting in early October of 2022, a commercial offering of Boundary was launched at HashiCorp, also known as HCP Boundary. Boundary is hosted on HashiCorp's cloud platform, hence the acronym HCP Boundary. HCP Boundary is a fully managed service. So all of the features that you know of in the Boundary open source offering are all available in HCP Boundary, along with other commercial features that we have launched so far, and more they're coming down the road. So you get all the benefits of HCP, the HCP platform, quick deployments to get started within minutes, zero CapEx, no upfront costs, and enterprise SLAs and support programs to ensure that you as a customer have continued success using Boundary. So as I mentioned, all existing commercial features such as credential injection and others on the roadmap, such as session recording, will only be available with HCP Boundary. While we still continue to support the open source version of Boundary, the enterprise features are only going to be available in HCP Boundary. So there is no cost to get started with HCP Boundary. If you want, you can kick the tires, familiarize yourself, or if you want to set up a quick POC to demo the solution to the rest of your team. Once you do get started, the pricing is completely consumption-based, means that you only pay for what you use. There is no restrictions on the number of users that you can onboard or a number of targets that you can onboard. It is totally based on how many sessions you're creating. So the cost is proportionate to your usage. Now I'll take a few minutes to go slightly deeper into the deployment model that Boundary supports. So looking at the slide, the diagram to the left on the screen is the fully managed HCP Boundary deployment. So Boundary consists of a control plane and a data plane. So users connect to the controller via a desktop client or a CLI, which manages the authentication and authorization process in conjunction with your identity provider, as well as the integration you may have with Vault. The control plane is completely stateless, and all authorization and session data is stored within an underlying Postgres database. The control plane does not have access to any of your targets in this case. The data plane is made up of something we call workers, which proxy the user's session to the target system that they're trying to connect to. The workers are also stateless and are able to access the remote targets over TCP. So any application which uses TCP can be accessed via Boundary, whether it's through SSH, remote desktop, Kubernetes, databases, etc. With HCP being a fully managed service, the controllers and workers are all hosted on the HCP cloud platform and are managed by us. We can scale up and scale down depending on the workload. And we also have load balancing, high availability, and some DR in place. Now, obviously, we recognize that there are many organizations that operate in a very, very heavily regulated industry. They may have very stringent security requirements and might have more secure and locked down network topologies. So in this case, the diagram to your right, you can see that we have this concept we call deploying self-managed workers. So in this case, you can deploy a worker node within your secure network and register it to the control plane and enable secure remote access to users without opening up your network to the public internet. The worker nodes only require outbound connection, network connection, as it initiates all connections with the control plane, and all session traffic remains within the network. So customers may deploy a worker within each of their isolated networks, as there's no technical or licensing restrictions around the number of workers that can be deployed within each environment. So all of the session traffic, your users, the targets, the worker, it all stays within your own secure network enclave. Obviously, in this case, because the workers are hosted and managed by the customer in the customer's environment, so the customer will be responsible for the uptime and maintenance of the worker nodes in this deployment model. If you move on to the next slide. So I'll just quickly recap some of the key highlights of Boundary at this point. So on the end users front, Boundary provides a command line interface and a very intuitive desktop UI client for Windows, Mac, and Linux in order to create sessions. So you see the screenshot to the left of the screen. That's the screen you'll get when you use the Boundary desktop client, regardless of the platform. So there are many flexible options depending on your user's operating environment and preferences, depending on which client they want to use to make connections. Users obviously have a very consistent workflow to access resources, whether it's a database, VM, remote desktop, or so on. Now, on the admin side of things, you're able to leverage your existing corporate IDP provider to manage your users' identities. We support all major IDPs, as I mentioned earlier, Azure, Okta, Ping, anything that supports OpenID Connect, really. You can also set up access policies based on your users' group membership that are already defined within the AUD provider. So you can leverage the managed groups that are, let's say, present in your Azure AD and bring those into Boundary. You don't have to set up new groups from scratch within Boundary. We have seamless integration for those customers who are already using HashiCorp Vault, whether it's Vault Enterprise or HCP Vault. This ensures that users have just-in-time access to credentials and dynamic secrets. This makes access a lot easier and more secure for users by brokering or directly injecting credentials at connection time and not having full access to the creds. Because Boundary is designed with the cloud operating model in mind, Boundary can detect newly deployed cloud resources, whether it's EC2 instances or VMs on your AWS or Azure public cloud providers. And Boundary, last but not least, Boundary has extensive observability and auditing capabilities, so you can ensure optimal system performance, deliver higher uptimes for your customers, your in-house customers, through proactive troubleshooting, and ensure compliance by auditing your end user activity. I will elaborate a little bit more on these concepts in the next slide here. So Boundary supports near real-time audit streaming functionality. So as events related to end users' activities can be viewed in real time. As an admin, you can view detailed audit trail around which users are logging into Boundary and their activities around resource creation or modification. So if somebody creates a target, deletes a target, or changes its configuration, you can see all of that in real time, as well as session stats such as start and end times of sessions, number of connections, data transfer, and there's a lot more detail that I can't go through here, but there's comprehensive auditing functionality within Boundary. And all of this information can be easily streamed to your SIEM system of choice for very easy consumption, query, and storage to help your organization stay compliant with any regulatory requirements. Now, if you're a platform operator and you're responsible for ensuring the peak performance and uptime of your on-prem Boundary OSS deployment, you would care a lot about performance KPIs and any kinds of status alerts that are indicative of an imminent outage. For that reason, both the control plane of Boundary as well as the data plane serve up key metrics in the open metrics exposition format for easy consumption in a tool such as Datadog. The control plane is responsible for serving up the Boundary API. So if you notice a spike, for example, if you notice a spike in request durations, it might indicate that your environment is not optimized to scale, and you could explore deploying additional controllers to address those scaling concerns. Similarly, workers are responsible for managing sessions between the user and hosts. Metrics here could help you troubleshoot any connectivity issues that your users may be facing. And you could always set up alerts on any of these metrics, so you get a alert before users start reaching out to you and logging tickets that they can't access the targets. Moving on to the next slide. This is a nice segue of speaking of observability and auditing. I want to thank Datadog for partnering with HashiCorp to create a very turnkey HCP Boundary integration that provides comprehensive visibility into Boundary infrastructure. To go over all of these out-of-the-box dashboards, recommended monitors, built-in integrations with the Datadog agent, and so on, I will now hand over to my colleague, Shri, who will be more than happy to walk you through all the exciting Datadog features.
Hey, everyone, and thanks, Ananda. Hi, so my name is Shri. I'm a senior product manager here at Datadog, focused on our Datadog agent and the integrations that come with it. And I would like to extend my thanks to everyone here for joining this webinar as well. So as Ananda mentioned, I'm here to talk about the new integration that Datadog has with HashiCorp Boundary that we have actually worked closely with the Boundary team here to develop and launch. And some of the topics that I'll be kind of covering today is a quick introduction about Datadog, who we are, what we do, and then dive deeper into our Boundary integration and how it can help you get up and running very quickly. And also kind of talk through how this integration can serve both our platform operator personas as well as the security admin persona as well. So a quick introduction into what is Datadog. So Datadog is an observability platform that provides full visibility across your organization. We enable everyone, such as your ops, dev, security, and even business teams to have a complete understanding of both system as well as application performance. We do that by monitoring end-to-end from your infrastructure network to your applications and services, all the way down to your end users too. We were founded in 2010 with the primary motivation to break down silos between both dev and ops team, and have now extended that to security teams as well. And this goal is primarily what drives our product goals and integration objectives as well. So, in the next slide, one thing to kind of quickly highlight as a platform, we take a pretty, platform view into how we connect all the different products and services we have. We kind of seamlessly connect your metrics, logs, services, so you can see what's happening and also know why it's happening too. For example, you can view metrics from your infrastructure, applications, and users, and then easily correlate that to traces that follow the code path from your user's browser all the way through your backend systems and data stores. And from that, you can also view this together with the logs that were generated from your systems during that time too. And we provide all of this information under like a single tool or under a single pane of glass, so you can kind of pinpoint problems and resolve them quickly. And integrations, as you'll kind of get to see moving on in the next slide as well, is we have over 600 of these that kind of target all of this kind of primary need. Right? We kind of cover everything from applications, frameworks, languages, and third-party services that you may be using. And so from collecting critical data and out-of-the-box insightful dashboards to alerting and collaborative tools like PagerDuty and Slack, we have integrations for all of these that has really made setup a breeze, right? And one such integration that we'll be talking about today is the integration that we have with Boundary. And we'll kind of talk about how you can correlate the information that are getting both from your metrics and logs together from Boundary, as well as from maybe any other kind of services that you may be using in your platform. So diving into monitoring Boundary with Datadog. So as Anando had mentioned, one of the primary use cases for monitoring Boundary around performance monitoring and access auditing, right? So by now it should be pretty clear on why monitoring Boundary would be important. So Boundary secures remote access to your hosts and services, which means that it will be critical to monitor this on two main fronts. One, it is important to monitor the health and performance of your Boundary nodes. And then the second one is it's also equally important, if not more, to monitor for any anomalous access behaviors or events. And these two monitoring use cases are essentially underpinned by a strong kind of alerting strategy or alerting platform, right? And the Datadog Boundary integration covers all these fronts. Our integration comes with an out-of-the-box dashboard that can be used as a starting point for platform operators and security admins. And we have recommended monitor or alerts that are pre-configured templates that can be activated easily as well. And with our other integrations, such as with HashiCorp Vault, you can also get complete visibility all from a single tool. And I'll dive into each one of these in greater detail as well. But in summary, with the Datadog Boundary integration, you can monitor the health and performance of your HCP Boundary instances and track all user sessions with the environment. So in the next slide, diving deeper into one of the first use cases was around performance monitoring. So the Datadog integration allows you to monitor the health of both your controller and worker nodes. And based on your deployment model, your needs may vary. So Ananda just kind of walked through different deployment models. And for example, if you're using the fully managed version of HCP Boundary, then you probably don't need to worry about the performance monitoring at all. But if you're using maybe say the self-managed workers or using the open source version, then monitoring both your Boundary workers and controllers will be something that you'll be responsible for. So let's see what performance monitoring really means for each of these, right? So for controller, as you may be familiar, controller nodes serve the Boundary API and apply your configured access policies to new sessions. And so for this, you can monitor a variety of metrics such as request latencies, request and response sizes, etc. An example metric that you may want to keep an eye on would be something like request duration seconds, right? So this can be seen to potentially indicate that your HCP Boundary is not optimized to scale and progress requests in a multi-cloud environment, right? So by maybe scaling out and deploying multiple workers, this can potentially help you manage traffic more efficiently and decrease request latency. Similarly, on the workers, again, worker nodes, these primarily manage your sessions between a local self-managed HCP Boundary agent in a user's network environment and destination host. So when it comes to monitoring workers, you'll primarily be looking for things like, can your worker actually connect with your control plane or not? So looking at maybe the number of connections, seeing if that drops or the spike, and then seeing what the send receive bytes are in terms of basic network traffic flow, right? These will help you see how healthy your connections are, or if you need to kind of maybe scale your workers. So a metric call out here would be something like the number of active connections, right? And if you see this metric suddenly drop, this would mean that your workers are no longer able to connect with your controller nodes. Great. So moving to the next slide here. So this is the second use case that we talked about, right? And this is actually one of my favorite aspects of integration. So with the Datadog integration for Boundary, you can also track user activity in real time. So you can use the audit events that are streamed from Boundary and collected by Datadog, and then use the Datadog log capabilities to analyze these events in greater detail, right? With a logs explorer, you can slice and dice this data as needed, and you can set up alerts, monitors based on your use cases. So what do these audit events really capture, right? These events include all create, list, delete, update operations that are performed by a Boundary client, which might be, say, like a desktop or a browser-based admin UI, right? Or on any of the resources that was within Boundary, right? And these audit events would be relevant for all deployment models of Boundary as well. And the information that you can analyze here would be information about sessions, workers, your credential stores, what are the authentication methods that are being used, right? And what are the different sets of targets or host sets that you have configured. And the key aspect from a Datadog integration perspective is that we stream all these audit events that come from HCP Boundary, and we have an out-of-the-box log pipeline that automatically passes all the relevant fields or keys from these JSON logs. This can be really helpful when it comes to when you need to be able to easily search, filter, and aggregate by these fields, right? So for example, you can look at login analysis, look at, see if there's like a sudden spike in the number of logins or even failed logins, right? See if there's a sudden spike for a specific user that is trying to kind of log in as well. And what authentication methods is users using, right? So this can be definitely very helpful, both for, like, say, a platform operator, or even for a security admin within your enterprise as well. Similarly, if you see maybe there is a high number of like unsuccessful connections, right? You can analyze that from the logs, right? Have a widget that kind of helps you monitor that, and maybe set up a monitor alert that kind of alerts you. And then you can dive deeper into the logs using a log explorer to understand why maybe there is a high failure in terms of the connections. And then, from a auditing perspective, you can also kind of monitor and see, who is accessing the different sets of host sets that you've configured, right? The different sets of targets that you have, and ensuring that the right people have the right permissions to the right kind of data points. So that's one of the primary use cases here when it comes to auditing and monitoring user activity, right? And this can also help you ensure compliance as well as per your overall compliance requirements. And from the next slide, one thing to kind of highlight here is, apart from Boundary, we also have an integration with HashiCorp Vault. So as you may recall, you can use Vault as one of your credential brokering systems, when you're using Boundary as well. And this really kind of allows you to get an overview of both Boundary as well as Vault, right? All together within like a single pane of glass. A Vault integration provides an overview of the health and performance of Vault, ranging from request throughput and latency to token activity and Consul usage if you're using Consul. And more importantly, you can gain a deeper understanding of Vault's activities by collecting and analyzing the logs from your Vault servers. So this way you can contextualize any issue you have with Boundary along with the logs from Vault to understand and get to the bottom of issues more quickly. So for example, if you see like failed authentication events, right, you can quickly determine using both boundary as well as vault logs if this is because your secret management service is unavailable. And quickly kind of either eliminate that as a possibility or confirm that as a possibility, right? And just by using both of these within a logs explorer. So that actually kind of like wraps up pretty much the key, value benefits that we have with the boundary integration, right? So in summary, what we've just seen is the Datadog integration with boundary. You can monitor the health and performance of your HCP boundary instances, and you can also track all the user sessions within your environment. And with other integrations such as Vault, you get all the context you need for your monitoring and troubleshooting needs behind a single pane of glass. And yeah, that's pretty much an end to our presentation here. Thanks so much for joining, and you can definitely kind of try out Datadog as well as HCP Boundary. We have these QR codes or the links that you can use to kind of access these. And if you have any questions, we're happy to take these now. Or we also have our email too, and we're happy to take them later on as well.
Thank you so much. This was a very interesting presentation. Grateful for our speakers. We have a couple of questions that I'll ask here, see if you guys can answer. Being that HCP Boundary is a managed service, any concerns around network latency when my users connect to targets on-prem or to my private cloud?
That's a great question. I guess I'll take that question because it's boundary related, not Shri. That's number one in our sort of FAQ, I guess, doc. So the question is that if I'm using HCP boundary, obviously the control plane is hosted by HashiCorp in a specific cloud region. And as a customer, you could be located anywhere, across the country or, across the world. So there's obvious concern here around network latencies if you're trying to connect using boundary. So the answer to that is not really, because if you're using boundary, you have the option to use self-managed workers. So the worker node that I talked about earlier on, you can take the binary and deploy it in your own private network where your users are located or your targets are located. So that worker node is in fact responsible for brokering that connection between your user on one end and your target on the other side. So if that worker node is co-located where users are or targets are, there shouldn't be any network latencies. The control plane, which is hosted by us, only does the authentication authorization portion, and then it hands it over to the worker node. So shouldn't be any concerns there. That's, yeah.
All right. Why should I use Datadog for streaming boundary audit logs and not some other SIEM provider?
Because it's Datadog. Datadog is awesome. but to provide a more objective answer on that, obviously Shri went through all of the benefits of using Datadog because of all the integrations that we have within Datadog out of the box. You don't have to do a lot of configuration. You can get going right away. Outside of that, when you're configuring your HCP boundary deployment to stream all your audit events to Datadog, it literally takes like 5 seconds to set that up. You provide the API key and I think the region of the Datadog instance that you're using, and that's it. I have very limited experience using Datadog or any other SIEM tools, and I could set it up in 30 seconds and I could see my boundary events show up within Datadog on the other side. And obviously, because we have such an awesome partnership with Datadog team, Shri's team, and everybody else within Datadog. So we're constantly working on providing better functionality, more features. As we launch more features within Boundary, we launch newer versions of Boundary. We will obviously ensure that the compatibility continues to work as we go along. I don't know if she wants to add anything to that question, why Datadog should be used over any other streaming providers, but that's my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much kind of like covered all the main points, really. It's ease of setup and configuration. We talked through how, if you're already monitoring with Datadog, all the other services, right? You basically kind of get an opportunity to bring all your data under like one single platform, one single kind of roof. And then it allows you for like a more effective troubleshooting journey.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. One last one here. How do I integrate HCP boundary with on-prem or HCP Vault instance?
Okay, so the way the integration works with HCP boundary is and with Vault, whether it's a self-managed on-premise Vault Enterprise or Vault OSS Vault version or even HCP Vault, the core integration stays the same. So essentially, what you would do is take the boundary worker binary and plop it into the same network enclave as your Vault instance. And that's the sort of the connection point between boundary and vaults. In this case, if you're using HCP Vault, but you have Vault Enterprise in your locked down network, obviously because Vault has all your secrets, all you would do is plop a boundary worker binary within that secure network space. And that worker binary will be used to broker connectivity between HCP boundary and Vault. As the worker binaries only make outbound connections, you don't have to sort of open up any inbound connections from boundary at all. So that's how it works. We do have in the roadmap, if you're a HCP boundary and HCP Vault customer, currently you got to you have something called an HVN, so HashiCorp Virtual Network, that you peer with a VPC of your choice on your AWS side of things to make those connections happen. So that's where you sort of drop the worker binary. So in summary, it's a little bit of a complicated process right now, but we do have it in our roadmap to make that integration much easier in the future, where we will do all of that automatic sort of worker configuration behind the scenes within your HCP Vault HVN. And all you need to do in sort of like as a user, which is just like toggle a button and say, okay, make my boundary connect to my Vault, and we'll do the rest. But that's the roadmap. We are not quite there yet. But in essence, boundary is very easily able to be integrated to either HCP Vault, Vault Enterprise, Vault OSS, no matter which flavor of Vault you're running.
Fabulous. People feel free to ask questions. I want to remind everybody that this session is being recorded. We will be wrapping up the recording and sending it out to you if you want to watch later on. I do not see any more questions. If my panelists don't have anything to add, we can give people some minutes back.
Yeah, I just want to quickly add that on the screen here, we have our email addresses if you wanted to reach out, and please feel free to do so. But outside of that, we also have Discuss forums for posting boundary-related questions. If you're trying out boundary or if you're getting stuck somewhere in your implementation journey, we also have GitHub repos for our boundary OSS installation. There's a very active community there of users. People post questions, issues, feature requests all the time on our GitHub issues. So please feel free to engage there. Not only are there like HashiCorp people sort of monitoring those questions and posts, but there are other fellow users such as yourself, other practitioners who have, happy to help, who have gone through the similar boundary or other HashiCorp products in the past, and they're happy to share their experiences and their knowledge and know-how. So there's multiple ways to engage with us. If there's something that you feel is missing in boundary, you've taken a quick look at it, you've gone through a quick POC, and there's some core functionality that's sort of missing, that sort of is a blocker for your organization. Again, please feel free to reach out to myself. My email address is on the screen. In fact, it's Anando@HashiCorp also works. You don't have to put my last name, so it's easier to remember. Multiple ways to engage, and I'll be really, really, really excited to hear back from the community and engage, answer questions, and so on.
Well, that's a great point. I think a lot of our growth comes from input from the community.
exactly. Sure. Yeah, most of the feature requests that we're shipping out in Boundary versions, they're mostly community driven. So we love all the feedback we can get from the community.
I did get a last minute question here. How it is zero trust? Is it only if self-hosted?
So no, the concept of zero trust expands to not only if it's self-hosted, that it's a concept, right? So regardless of the deployment model, whether it is self-hosted, whether it is HashiCorp managed, fully managed service, the concept about zero trust is that you don't trust anybody or any system. The concept of least privileged access, right? So identities are used to ensure who you are, who you claim to be, who you are, and then access is only given for a very set period of time, depending on those policies, to those very specific systems. So unlike a traditional, so in the case of Boundary, unlike a traditional setup where a user logs in through VPN, they have access to the entire network, as an example. So in this case, Boundary provides access to just the target that this user has requested access to. So that's sort of the concept of zero trust. It does not matter whether it is self-hosted, if it's open source, or if it's fully managed by HashiCorp. I think there was a little bit of context missing there, but if you have more detailed, want to have a detailed follow-up discussion, happy to talk later on.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. I wanted to make sure I wasn't on mute. It's happened to me before.
Awesome. Thanks everyone as well.
Thank you so much. And again, this is going to be recorded. We'll be sending it in a couple of days.
Bye.
Farewell.